a man called Jesus existed.
What William Lane Craig wants to do, though, is to take those 4 facts and start adding others to them as if they're the same value. There are very big problems with thinking there was a tomb at all. And I'm not sure William Lane Craig has even read much history about the time period.
The crowds.
No, but I don't think that's historical. Why would we think that's historical?
Thirdly, thereafter, various individuals and groups of people experienced appearances of Jesus alive. Ehrman's response to this is really puzzling.
So Bart Ehrman was on Alex O'Connor's podcast, and they talk about the resurrection of Jesus and how William Lane Craig was wrong. But William Lane Craig responds, and it's absolutely amazing. Let's get right into the video.
Podcast, I sort of, listening back, had wished that I pushed back a little more. And a lot of people actually noticed, and they said, I'm surprised that you didn't really give him a bit more grief for it.
Yeah.
But I figured that perhaps rather than making a botched attempt at doing it myself, it would be better to ask you. I mean, his view on the matter, along with many others, is that we have a few facts about Jesus that we can pretty confidently say are true. Firstly, that, a man called Jesus existed and was sort of going around teaching an ethical code of sorts and gaining followers, got into disrepute with the Roman authorities, was killed by crucifixion, and that afterwards groups of people claimed to have seen him. Do you think that all of these facts are sort of well established?
Yes.
So given that, how to explain the fact that all of these are true at the same time?
Oh, well, I don't see any trouble at all. We have other figures in history for whom we have things like that, with those 4 facts. I mean, Romulus, the founder of Rome, I don't know if he was a historical figure or not, but people thought he was, and he certainly ended up somehow leaving the earth, and people, there were eyewitnesses saying that they saw him alive afterwards.
I mean, do we have sort of, firstly, are the sources as reliable? Are they as well attested? Do we have multiple?
Now that's another question. See, that's not one of your 4 things.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I guess what I'm asking about is when we say that these facts are well established.
Well, Livy, the historian Livy, so he's a Roman historian, and he reports that. Or Apollonius of Tyana. We have eyewitness testimony to his being raised from the dead.
What eyewitness testimony are we talking about? Like who is it that claims
followers of his?
Like
said
groups
they saw him alive
at the same time, they sort of all see him sort of all in the same room, or?
Oh no, but see, now you're getting into other facts. See.
Yes.
So the question is, what are facts? So if you're just talking about those 4 elements, then we certainly have those 4 elements, so they're not difficult to explain. What William Lane Craig wants to do, though, is to take those 4 facts and start adding others to them as if they're the same value.
What other facts are we talking about here?
Well, he says that we know that there was an empty tomb.
And you don't think that that's the case?
I don't know.
And one of the things that I think Dr. Craig might say on that point is that if people were claiming to have seen him, if people were claiming that this man had risen from the dead, the tomb was there. It was something people could have gone to check. And it would have probably been one of the first things that they did upon hearing that this Jesus figure had risen from the dead. If there were no empty tomb, surely someone would have discovered this. This is not good evidence confirming the idea that there was, in fact, an empty tomb.
Well, it presupposes that he was buried in a tomb.
This is one of the facts that that William Lane Craig thinks we can say is well established, that he was buried in a tomb. That's important to him. You don't think so?
No, I don't. I mean, that's the thing. He takes these 4 things that basically everybody would agree on. There's a man, Jesus, who got killed, and later people said they saw him alive. So that's fine. I mean, those 4 are easily explained. Was there an empty tomb? There are very big problems with thinking there was a tomb at all. He's presupposing that the gospel story is right, that Joseph of Arimathea took Jesus the afternoon he was crucified and put him in a family tomb, and on the 3rd day, women came and found the tomb empty.
If the Bible got all of those other things right that we can prove outside of the Bible, what makes you think that it got all those other things wrong? That's what I'm wondering. And guys, be sure to be watching because William Lane Craig responds to Bart Ehrman here.
Okay, so what is our evidence of it? Well, the evidence, of course, is only in the Gospels. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, they say that. And it was the tradition that Christians had for a very long time. So it's certainly the Christian tradition. But there are lots of reasons for doubting that it's right, that he's never taken very seriously. But, you know, I don't know if this was on your thing or not, but somebody last week was interviewing me and replaying some things where he was trashing me for some debate we had 20 years ago, where he said that, you know, the only reason I reject resurrection is because I've got some kind of warmed over Humean understanding of things, and I've never read Hume. You know, it's like, it is just so wrong. It's just like, it is just, I mean, it's just factually wrong. But apart from that, you know, he says that I'm not a historian. I don't know what he thinks. I do know what he thinks I am. He thinks that I'm a textual critic, whatever he thinks that is. And that's just completely wrong, too. It's just like he knows nothing about me, but he's making stuff up. So historians look at what you know about the situation at the time period. And I'm not sure William Lane Craig has even read much history about the time period. But one thing to...
It's funny how he was being super upset that William Lane Craig was making all of these accusations without really knowing. And then he makes an accusation towards William Lane Craig about not even sure if he read anything about history during that time period.
That is, for example, just as an example, what do Romans do with crucified victims? So we have records of, we don't have lots of records. I mean, one of the really interesting things that people don't realize, we have no literary description of a crucifixion from the ancient world. Like, nobody describes how they did it. Like, were they typically nailed? We know they were nailed sometimes because we have some nails that with DNA on. We've got that organic material on them. Were they tied? Were they crossbeams? Were they stakes?
Another thing that the Bible got right, we don't know how they did the crucifixions, but we have evidence that we have people got nailed. And the only writings that show that how they crucified people was with nails is in the Bible. Another thing that the Bible got right.
There's all sorts of stuff we don't really know. We do have a number of references to what Romans did once the person died on their crosses. And the accounts are consistent that what they did is they left them on their crosses as part of the humiliation.
Yes.
That they would decompose on the cross and be attacked by scavengers. And so we have off-the-cuff remarks in a number of sources that that's just what they did. And so there are debates about that. We can have debates about whether that happened within Judaism or not. People say, yeah, Jews didn't allow that. It's absolutely right. Jews didn't allow it. But the Jews weren't killing him. The Romans were killing him.
Yeah.
and so forth and so on. So I don't know of any instance where we have a verified account of anybody being buried on the afternoon of their crucifixion in a known tomb. So how likely is it that they made an exception in the case of Jesus? I mean, we think they would because, you know, he's the Son of God, and so he's exceptional. But I mean, Pilate didn't know that Jesus was the Son of God. He was just one of the guys he was crucifying that morning.
It's still quite an exceptional case. I mean, Pilate seems quite distressed at the fact that Jesus ends up going to...
According to whom?
To crucifixion. Well, according to the gospel narrative.
The Christian narratives.
But this is a possibility.
He crucified... It's possible. It's possible he's more upset about one of the other two guys.
If it is true that you have an instance of Pilate really not thinking that this man ought to be crucified and asking the crowds...
No, but I don't think that's historical. Why would we think that's historical?
I guess I'm not trying to make the case that it's that we can know that this is the case, but this might be an explanation as to why we do have an instance of the Romans making an exception when it comes to sort of leaving someone on the cross. Because Jesus was exceptional, not just because he was the Son of God, because of course I don't believe that and the Romans wouldn't have believed that, but that it was still an exceptional case.
Why?
I guess in the case of Pilate, this might have been someone who he really didn't think deserved to be crucified.
Why?
Because this would...
It's so dumb. He's acting like the Bible has no credibility at all. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John don't have any credibility in any historicity. You have to have other sources outside of the Bible to prove any of it. And I love how Alex is completely defending the Bible kind of here.
If the gospel narratives are correct, if,
Yes.
if what's written there is correct.
That's right.
Again,
That's right.
I'm not claiming to be able to say that we know that they are, but if
no.
they were, this would offer an explanation of
That's
how
right.
we have an exception.
But the argument then is, if the gospel narratives are correct, then the gospel narratives are correct. And so that's not an argument.
But it seems to me that might be the case if the narratives were written so as to obviously give an explanation as to why Jesus was taken down from the cross. If it was clear that...
Yes, the gospel writers are explaining why he would be allowed off. That's right.
It doesn't seem particularly plausible to me, though, that the idea of presenting Pilate as slightly disturbed by the idea of Jesus being crucified was a device that was used to explain why Jesus would have been taken down from the cross when Romans didn't usually do that.
No, the reason for
that
showing
seems a little
Pilate's
far-fetched to me.
the reason for showing Pilate's disturbance is something else. The reason that when you look how Pilate's portrayed in the Gospels, in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and then you even add on later Gospels, like the Gospel of Peter and later Gospels, when you do that and you line them up chronologically, Pilate gets more and more disturbed. And he starts, in Mark, he and kind of the Jewish council, they agree, okay, he needs to be crucified. In Matthew's gospel, he washes his hands and says, I'm innocent of this man's blood. And the crowd cries out, his blood be upon us and our children. When you get to Luke, a little bit later, Pilate declares Jesus innocent 3 times. And he sends him off to Herod, who declares him innocent. When you get to the Gospel of John, he declares him innocent 3 times, and it says in John, the chief priests and scribes insisted he be crucified. And when you read it in the Greek, it says, Pilate then handed him over to them to be crucified, to the chief priests and scribes. When you get to the Gospel of Peter, it's even more. Pilate gets increasingly innocent, proclaiming Jesus' innocence. Why is that? Well, scholars have long known the answer to this one. If Pilate's not at fault, then who is? It's those damn Jews. They did it to him. So the reason for Pilate's exoneration is in order to heighten Jewish culpability. I don't think that's a historical motif. If you actually know anything about Pilate, if you read the descriptions in Philo or Josephus, this is not somebody who sat around agonizing about crucifying the wrong guy. And to think that Jesus is the exception just means that we're so used to thinking of Jesus as the exception. But for Pilate, he's just one of these troublemakers. He's called
because he is the exception, though. That's the thing. He had a lot of followers. He was causing an uproar. He was also trying to have peace within the land. Like, it wasn't just some random person that he was going to persecute. It wasn't just him thinking like he's another thief or whatever, or a zealot. It was more than just a zealot. Some people were saying he's the Messiah. Of course he was going to take this matter very serious.
the king of the Jews. Crucify him.
But now, a moment ago you said that, okay, William Lane Craig is wrong because he says that we can know there was an empty tomb, and we can't. It seems to me a relatively minor detail in that you said, we have these 4 facts, including that Jesus was crucified, including that groups of people claim to have seen him after he died. And you say, and these are...
I'm not sure groups of people claimed.
Okay, because this is what I wanted to pick up on when you said that this can be easily explained. What is it that you think can be explained? The fact that we have records of groups claiming to see Jesus, the fact that groups did actually claim to see Jesus, the fact that individuals claim to see Jesus. What are the things that you think, this isn't troubling for us to explain without having to invoke a resurrection?
I don't think it's troubling to invoke the idea that there were individuals who claimed they saw Jesus alive afterwards. I don't think we have good attestation for it. I think the Apostle Paul claims he saw Jesus alive a few years afterwards. And so I think, I don't think he's lying about it. I think he probably thought he saw Jesus.
Paul, also being our earliest source of the New Testament, claims at one point that Jesus appeared to 500 people.
That's right.
This seems to be some good evidence that we do have...
No, I don't think so. Paul knows there's a story that 500 people saw him. But I don't think that's evidence that 500 people saw him. that's a claim. And so a claim isn't evidence. Evidence is when you try to substantiate the claim. And so how do you go about establishing whether 500 people actually saw Jesus? Well, you look at what Paul says, and then you see, are there other sources to corroborate it? Paul's writing before the Gospels. None of the Gospels mentions anything about this, or the Gospel sources. So Paul's our only source. And
well, just because he claimed that 500 people doesn't mean it actually happened. But then he's like, you got to look to see if the sources. Does anyone collaborate with this? And he goes back to the Gospels, which is just so funny because all the other Gospels talk about Joseph of Arimathea burying Jesus in a tomb. So which one is it? But you said you use that as how you reference or understand something is true. He's going back and forth.
Is he right or not? Well, it seems like if 500 people saw him, that this would be something that other people would mention. So I don't think we know. The thing about seeing things is that we have all the time, we have people who see things that aren't there. And a lot of evangelical Christians say, look, if you've got group visions, you can't have group hallucinations.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah. So how do you explain Mother Mary showing up to hundreds of people at one time?
Well, I think I understand what you're saying, that we have examples of groups of people claiming that they've seen something that we don't actually believe they did.
Yes.
However, it seems in the case of the group sightings of Jesus, of the gospel narratives, we're talking about a sort of a man like physically walking into a room, interacting, talking with these people.
Yeah, that's right.
It's not like sort of seeing a vision of Mary.
We have modern accounts of Jesus showing up today in all sorts of circles.
But
physically showing up.
I don't suppose that we have accounts of a man who dies being seen by groups of people physically in the flesh, talking to them, interacting with them, allowing them to sort of touch his hand, and appearing to people who spent significant periods of their life following them. And so it's not like they could have been mistaken about the identity.
We certainly do have that of individuals in the ancient world. We have accounts of Romulus appearing to a senator and explaining what's happened to him. And so I think that, and my view of this is that the kinds of evidence we look for Jesus needs to be the kind of evidence we allow for anyone else.
I agree.
So it's striking to me that evangelical Christians focus on the Jesus materials, but they don't look at traditions that are comparable from the same period or since. And so they say, well, you can't have group hallucinations, but they think that's exactly what you have when the Blessed Virgin Mary shows up. Or they say it's different because Jesus' disciples saw him. Well, okay, but that's true of Apollonius of Tyana. Or that they'll say, well, but so many people have come to believe this, that it's implausible that would happen if so many people believe. Well, there are about 2 billion people in the world who think that Muhammad was physically taken up into heaven. So do you use the same criteria, or do you make exceptions in your case?
But to have all of these things together in one example, I mean, you're quite right that you have a sort of an ancient account of an individual claiming to see somebody, and then you have a modern account of groups claiming to see a vision of something, and then you have lots of people coming to believe something that they didn't see themselves. But put them together, groups of people seeing a sort of physical, physical sighting of a man who they used to know and followed around, and lots of them coming to believe that's the case all together seems to be a higher standard of evidence.
None of those people in any of those groups attests to it. You see what I'm saying? We don't have groups of people saying they saw Jesus.
We have individual writers
saying that groups of people saw him. And that isn't the same thing. You actually do have groups of people saying they saw Mary. And so that's stronger evidence.
And now I have William Lane Craig's video of him responding to this video. So let's get into it.
Well, first, I want to point out that Alex has got the 4 facts wrong that I appealed to for inferring the resurrection of Jesus. The facts that I appeal to are, first of all, that after his crucifixion, Jesus was interred in a tomb late on Friday afternoon by a member of the Jewish Sanhedrin named Joseph of Arimathea. The morning following the crucifixion, Jesus' tomb was discovered to be empty by a group of his female followers. Thirdly, thereafter, various individuals and groups of people experienced appearances of Jesus alive after his death. And finally, number 4, the original disciples suddenly and sincerely came to believe that God had raised Jesus from the dead despite every predisposition to the contrary. And those 4 facts are widely agreed upon by the majority of New Testament historians today and supply an inductive basis for inferring to the resurrection of Jesus. So those are the facts that I'm staking my claim on, not the facts mentioned by Alex. Now, Ehrman's response to this is really puzzling. He agrees that the facts mentioned by Alex are historical facts. He admits that. But he says these are easily explained. Why? Well, because similar facts are attested by other figures in antiquity, like Romulus and Apollonius. Now, on the face of this is bizarre. Suppose someone were to say, how do you explain the facts of the assassination of John F. Kennedy? And you were to reply, oh, that's easy to explain. President Lincoln and President McKinley were also assassinated. Those events wouldn't do anything to explain the facts of the assassination of JFK. Moreover, those 2 individuals are historical persons, right? But in the case of Romulus and Apollonius, we're dealing here with mythological and quasi-fictional persons.
That's a great point.
Romulus is the figure in the myth of the founding of Rome, who supposedly founded the city about 750 BC. Ehrman himself, you notice, says, I don't even know if he was a historical figure or not. The first account of the founding of Rome by Romulus is from the 3rd century BC, so hundreds of years later after this supposed event. Apollonius of Tyana was a 1st century philosopher and magician, a kind of shadowy figure. Well, over 100 years after his death, the Roman Empress Julia commissioned the writer Philostratus to write a sort of romance novel of the life of Apollonius of Tyana. And so most of this is just fiction made up by Philostratus. And it is interesting that Philostratus was commissioned to do this by the empress because she wanted to have a counterweight to the surging Christian movement in the early Roman Empire, and so wanted to create a kind of divine man figure to compete with Christianity. And so it's likely that Apollonius actually knew and used, or not Apollonius, Philostratus actually knew and used the Gospels in writing his life of Apollonius. John Alsop has written an authoritative book on the post-resurrection appearances in the Gospel tradition. And here's what Alsop says. He says, it is very probable, in light of the chronological and biological factors, that Philostratus, in one sense or another, is dependent upon the Gospel accounts, especially the Gospel of Luke, and maybe upon the Emmaus story. No sense comparable to the Gospel accounts of the life of Jesus, which were written down within the century of the eyewitnesses, within the generation of the eyewitnesses.
The only thing that I was going to say in response to this first clip is that, yeah, these were not the 4 facts that you mentioned: the crucifixion, the empty tomb, the appearances, and then the origin of belief. Like those are the 4 that you normally appeal to, and that those are way more difficult to explain.
What must not be missed here is the concession that Bart Ehrman makes to Alex O'Connor. Ehrman concedes that if the burial narrative is historically reliable, then it becomes extremely difficult to deny the historicity of the empty tomb. Because if the burial story is accurate, that implies that the site of Jesus' grave was known to Jew and Christian alike in Jerusalem. And therefore, when the disciples began to preach the resurrection of Jesus, that tomb had to be empty in order for belief in the resurrection of a dead man to originate and flourish in the very city where he was publicly crucified and his tomb was known. So that means that Ehrman is in the very difficult position of having to disprove the burial account. The person who believes in the empty tomb doesn't need to prove the burial story. He can have other reasons in support of the empty tomb account. But the burial account is the sine qua non of the empty tomb story. If you're going to deny the empty tomb, then you've got to disprove the burial account. Well, we've got good reasons to believe that the burial account is reliable. We have at least 5 independent sources in support of the burial account. Moreover, the burial of Jesus by a member of the Sanhedrin, rather than by his beloved disciples or by his family, is unexpected and therefore very unlikely to have been a fictional or legendary creation in the early Christian community. And therefore, the vast majority of scholars, virtually all New Testament scholars, agree that the burial story of Jesus' corpse in the tomb by Joseph is historical. Ehrman asserts...
I don't know how Bart Ehrman's like, we don't even know if Jesus actually did get buried. But I'm pretty sure there's great evidence for Jesus actually being buried in the tomb.
There are lots of reasons to doubt that Jesus was buried, but you notice he never says what they are. Instead, he immediately changes the subject. So if Ehrman is going to disagree with the almost unanimous opinion of New Testament scholarship that the burial account is credible, then he needs to give us what these overwhelming reasons are.
Yeah, true. And then he asked, what is our evidence of the empty tomb? I suppose we can get to that in a second. I did want to bring something up really quickly.
Well, I did mention 2 facts, Cameron, that namely it has multiple independent attestation in at least five different sources.
Independent
and that's
sources.
one of the most important evidences for historicity. And then also the unlikelihood of a burial of Jesus by a Sanhedrist, a member of the very council that had condemned Jesus.
Wow. So there are a lot of independent sources to prove that Jesus was actually buried. That's absolutely amazing. So crazy. Guys, what are your thoughts? John 19:38 says, afterward, Joseph of Arimathea, who had been a secret disciple of Jesus, because he feared the Jewish leaders, asked Pilate for permission to take down Jesus' body. When Pilate gave permission, Joseph came and took the body away. And I don't understand how Bart Ehrman is just like, for the claims that Paul made is not credible, but then when the burial of Jesus has multiple sources, then it's not credible because it's in the Bible all at once. That's what's crazy. I don't know, guys. Let me know what you guys think in the comments, but I really hope you guys do know that Jesus does love you and he does exist and he does have and he is longing to have a relationship with you. I encourage you guys to go to him today. Know that he loves you. Yeah, in the description below, you'll be able to click the link to help you decide to follow Jesus for the first time. I encourage you to do that today.